Okay, yes, it is not actually a cooperation which is an established one
Right.
or a coordination, but it will continue, it will increase. I give an example. Yes, the visit of Fondelai and Macron in China, which has attracted quite a lot of attention, was pretty critical towards China, regardless of Macron's statements that were a bit different. The position of the European Union vis-à-vis China is quite critical and firm when it comes to some issues. However, something that many people have overlooked is what happened a few days before Macron and von der Leyen went to China, and which I reported in a short piece that I published on the website of the Wilson Center in Washington, D.C. A few days before the French president went to China, French company Total Energies and China National Offshore Oil Corporation completed the first purchase of imported liquefied natural gas to be settled in Chinese renminbi.
Interesting.
What does it mean? It means that for the first time, a major European company, well, by chance French in that case, just a few days before Macron went to China, decided to use the Chinese currency to buy liquefied natural gas. It's small. It's just something that in the order of magnitude of exchanges between the two sides is really small. However, it gives an indication of where the trend might be. It is something that it was not discussed too much. I think Macron wanted to stay away from touching the issue of multipolar currency order or de-dollarization.
Sure.
Also because he made already some remarks that attracted the attention and the concern of the allies. So probably he didn't want to go too much into that direction. But what it is happening is the private sector in Europe is using more and more the Chinese currency. I gave you the example of Total Energies, but European banks are those at the forefront when it comes to the use of the Chinese currency. The Chinese created a few years ago this China Interbank payment system, CHIPS, which is alternative to the Western-dominated SWIFT. If you recall, last year, when after Russia invaded Ukraine, the Western allies kicked off Russia from SWIFT, which meant that Russia was unable to process its international payments using this network, which is the biggest one, because since it is dominated by the Western nations, they decided to kick Russia out. Now, Russia has then, and since then, used alternative methods of payment, including, and more importantly, the Chinese one, the China Interbank payment system. Now, the fact that European banks are those that have the highest number in the CHIPS, which means that the CHIPS is an alternative network of banks, the majority of which are Chinese. But outside China, the highest number of these banks is in Europe, which means that European banks are essentially supporting a wider use of the renminbi for international transactions. But another example, across Europe now, there have been since like in the last decade, a lot of renminbi hubs, places where you can exchange the renminbi. They are in London, Paris, Frankfurt, Milan. That's already an indication of the growing use of the renminbi in Europe. On top of that, some important stock exchanges, London, Paris, Frankfurt, Milan, they have created connection mechanisms with the stock exchange in Shanghai, again, promoting financial links and often using the Chinese currency. In other words, I'm observing the current trend. On the one hand, EU-China relations are worsening. And it gives the idea sometimes to a superficial observation that it is more and more limited the number of areas where the cooperation happens. In reality, not only the cooperation areas is not shrinking, but there are some areas which are not studied enough, like the monetary and financial areas, which are instead growing. So we have tensions in Europe-China relations, but the reality is different. And Europeans and Chinese so far are increasing their level of cooperation on many issues. Going forward, I would expect Europe to play an important role in the internationalization of the renminbi. Already, European banks, as I mentioned before, are increasingly using the renminbi. Right. And I would expect that to grow. Also because the Chinese currency is used more and more by other important actors, not only Russia, but we saw in the last weeks Saudi Arabia willing to price the oil that it sells to China using the Chinese currency, but also Brazil, for instance. So the trend is towards a growing use of the Chinese currency, which could also be used politically by the Chinese leadership in order to support further the Eurozone in case the Eurozone meets again another crisis. All of that indicates that the trend towards de-dollarization will continue, that China is not the only actor active on this trend towards de-dollarization, that also the Europeans are contributing, and that by observing what the Europeans and the Chinese are doing vis-a-vis each other, we may get a better view of what will be the future of the monetary order